The schools may be gone, but the legends live forever. Welcome to the Final Jumpshot podcast. Here's your host, Marcus Carlton.
Welcome back to another episode of the Final Jumpshot. Now, we're in the late stages of the fourth quarter of season 1, but we have another first for this episode. Episode 8 is going to be the first episode to feature a female superstar from the hardwood. Mary Adams, now known as Mary Adams-Holden, was a high-scoring post player in the late 80s for the purple and gold of the Swifton Lady Pirates and Coach Tim Gardner. As a matter of fact, Mary is still second all-time for most points in a single game in the NEA tournament. So without further ado, here's the story of Mary Adams, Swifton Lady Pirate. Well, joining me now on this episode of the Final Jump Shot is actually our first female guest that we've had, Mary Adams-Holden, former Swifton Lady Pirate. Mary, I appreciate you coming on the show with me.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Marcus.
So I'm pretty familiar with Swifton because where I grew up in Biggers Reno and Swifton were in the same conference for a number of years. And I know that basketball was just as important to the Swifton Pirate community as it was for where I grew up. So what are some of your favorite memories from your playing days at Swifton?
Oh, gosh. You know what? I mean, I have some specific memories, like specific moments. I can't remember whole games, but I just know that it was a great time, in your life to be on a team in a small town. Some of our best memories, I think we had really good team. My 8th grade year, junior year, I know some of the older girls teams are really good in the 80s. So, I mean, we had a lot of success, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but we really enjoyed being together and playing and, just going out and competing every, 2 nights a week. I think that's what we did back then.
Yeah, it was a little different because Swifton was one of the Class B schools like where I grew up, and boys and girls both played on the same night, and a lot of teams now don't do that because you'll have your girls' nights designated and your boys' nights, but back when we all played, it was usually junior girls, senior boys, or junior boys, senior girls, senior boys. So it was a little different look to it.
Yeah, I do. I remember that. And you brought that up. Yeah, it changed because my kids played, of course, when they played ball, it was a little different, like you just mentioned. But yeah, I remember that 3-game night, and a lot of those away games were a little late.
Yeah, it was, there was nothing quite like having to go, an hour and a half bus ride away on a school night to play 3 games. And then you have that same bus ride all the way back because I don't know if you were this way, but I was this way a lot as a kid. I didn't want to ride back with my folks. I wanted to ride back on the bus with all of my friends.
Yeah, no, that was unheard of back in the day. You rode the bus. Most people rode the bus. It was, that was just kind of closed it out. So.
Yeah, and it was always a lot more fun to ride that bus home after a win than a loss because I don't know if your coaches were this way, but there were some nights that the night went so bad that if there was anything above a whisper going on the bus, coach was not going to be happy with you.
Definitely. I've been told before, why are y'all smiling up in the stands after a loss? What's so great about the rest of the night? Yeah, we had a tough coach. So, yeah, I believe that.
So to kind of piggyback off of that, tell me about your coach that you played for and who some of your teammates were.
So my coach from 7th grade on, which, back then when you started junior high in the 7th grade, that was, how it worked. And junior high and high school were all together. But my 7th grade coach and on through junior year was Tim Gardner. And he had coached, he was young at that point, but he had coached for a couple of years. And I think he had coached at Delaplane before he came here. But he grew up in Marmaduke and he played ball in Marmaduke. So, he really was probably only 10 years older than we were at that time. But he was a really big part of my life for those 4 or 5 years that he was, coaching us, and a wonderful person. I actually spoke to him a couple of weeks ago to prepare for this because I knew that he would remember more than I did. And we talked for 2 hours and it was like it was nothing. But he was a great coach, and he really had a great impact on my life.
So tell me about some of your teammates that you played with over at Swifton.
So, on my team, I played with some girls that were usually, there was a group that was a little bit older. Like when I was in the 8th grade, I did play a lot. I started, but I would play with Andrea Dukes was one, Gail Lloyd was one. And then, of course, when I was in 7th grade, it was Joy Holt, Candy King, Kim Dudley. And, of course, you jump up when you go into senior high basketball and you're a sophomore, they're seniors. But the ones that really, all of those girls were really good teammates, but I learned more from the group from 86, who was Kim Smith, Michelle Butler, Valerie Green. So when I was in school, we had, you would have senior girls practice 6th hour, and then senior boys had 7th hour, and then you would come after school. So, from the 7th grade on, I was in the gym for hours after school because I practiced with the senior girls. Well, that team was really good that year, 86, and they went to regional tournament, which was in Newark that year. And that was when they first had that nice big gym. And I remember that we got to move up and play with them when we were freshmen. And we got to, after your junior high career was over, if, you had the opportunity they would move the 9th graders up. So we got to play in the regional tournament, and we actually got to play in a game because unfortunately that team was getting beat, but they were really good players. And they really taught me a lot in practice, and they were tough. They were a little bit mean, but they taught us to be good players.
I'm glad that you said something about that, about how you learned from them, but they were a little bit mean, because I wanted to, that's where my next question was going to go about, did they come in and kind of welcome you in and take you under their wing, or did they kind of press you at times to kind of see how you would react in maybe a pressure situation, or if you got fouled really hard, or, something that might happen to you in a game? Did they kind of set you up like that in practice, and then you learn from that?
Oh, absolutely. They didn't hold back on any of us. And I think maybe especially me, by the time I was a freshman, I was really kind of coming into my own, and I was learning a lot. When I started out in the 7th grade, this is no joke. I was 5'2", and I was a point guard. And in between my 7th grade year and my 8th grade year, I grew 6 inches. So when I came back, I was 5'8", 5'9", and I was a forward post, is what we called a post player back then. So they did not take it easy on us. They were almost brutal at times, but girls could play that way. Honestly, I feel like girls played a lot rougher than guys did even back then. But they didn't hold back. They played hard, and you had to keep up, or, maybe go home. But I was fouled hard. I learned a lot, and I learned what it meant to be an aggressive player and to play to win.
That's been the big thing that I have noticed with these other episodes, is that, everybody that I've talked to, even the coaches or the former players, winning was the most important thing. They want, it's Absolutely. Nice if you scored 20 points a game and had 15 rebounds or whatever, but the bottom line was, if you didn't get the win, the night was kind of a failure.
Absolutely. I think probably with guys, that was probably a little bit easier. Girls, it's a whole different animal. I don't know if you have any daughters. I have two. I have a son and two daughters. And I knew, girls can be real catty at sometimes, and sometimes it's very competitive. And, when you're a really good player and another girl is coming up and kind of competing with you, sometimes it can get a little hairy. But they were older and they knew that that was their year, and so there wasn't a lot of it. But they taught me a lot. They really did. And Coach Gardner he put a lot of effort into me to help me to be the best player that I could be. And that was part of it. He wanted me to be in the gym with those girls, and that just made us better,
Well, and I think to kind of expand on Coach Gardner, and you talked about how important of a role he played in your life. I think that's a sign of a good coach, that they can see into a young player and see the talent, and then know the player well enough to decide, okay, this player is going to respond well if they are, if they get roughed up a little bit. I know exactly how they're going to respond, because I think sometimes that gets overlooked, how coaches have to know how to read their players, because every player is different and every player responds to situations differently.
Yeah, that's very true. And like I say, I know that because my kids came up in a different time, and I watched them and coached them and all that. But there were things that Coach Gardner did with me, and not just me, but he did specifically things that I remember that coaches would probably get fired for now. I mean, unfortunately, that's just the world we live in. But I remember from the time I was probably in the 8th grade, back in those days, you had your court and we had the regular goals, and then we had 2 goals on the ends, just on the wall. They were just old, cardboard, not even cardboard, but the wood backboards. Mm-hmm. And so on those goals, when we were having practice, he would have me on one of those goals, and I kid you not, he would take a broom, and every time I shot, he would hit me with that broom. And all he was doing was preparing me, because he knew I was going to play a post, position, and he knew I was going to get fouled. And he knew I needed to be able to make the shot getting fouled. And it worked, because, I was pretty tough. I was real skinny and let's say about 5'9", but I knew how to play against bigger players that were stronger than me, because he did, out of the box stuff like that. I just thought it was kind of funny when we started doing that. And, now if somebody went home and told their mom, well, I'm getting hit with a broom in practice, it might not go well.
Right. Yeah. Everybody jumped to conclusions on that, and probably, it would get out of hand in a hurry. But
exactly.
You mentioned something earlier that caught my attention, and I want to talk a little bit about it. You talked about that big growth spurt you had, but from one year to the next, and you went from playing the point guard, the one position, probably down to a 4 or a 5, power forward or a center. How did that, having that experience at point guard, did that help you down in the post? Because you still probably thought like a point guard for a while before you got fully into the post game.
Yeah. So, I know, like 7th grade, I don't remember a lot about 7th grade season. You're just really young, and you're coming out of elementary school, and you're really just learning. And by the way, I mean, I had great elementary peewee coaches, is what we called them, and that's when I started loving basketball, was in peewee. But when I got in the 8th grade and I was taller and changed positions, of course, I still had a little bit of dribbling skills, and I was really a defensive minded person at that time. The older I got, the more I kind of got away from that. I wouldn't say I got lazy, but it's kind of like when you learn to score. Right. You're like, oh, this is the payback right here. I would rather get this. But I mean, it was a transition. And in the ninth grade, from then on out, back then you played the 5-position, team. It was, you had your point guard, you had your 2 wings, you had a post and a forward. And, I basically stayed in the paint. I did come out and shoot some, but that kind of brings up another it was back then, this is the 80s, early 80s, mid 80s. So when I was 15, I had to go to the eye doctor, and all of a sudden, I couldn't see. My vision was not good, and I got my first pair of glasses. So I would have been a sophomore. And I kid you not, you could not play in your glasses. You could buy one pair of glasses, and, I didn't wear them in a game because I couldn't take the chance on breaking my glasses. It's not like my parents just had all kinds of money and could go buy another pair of glasses. So, I played I could see the goals. It's not like I was blind, but I didn't get to shoot a lot of threes. Now, Coach Gardner assured me that I did pull out in the corner a lot and shoot. I don't remember taking a lot of shots outside, but I stayed in the paint and had little jump shots and, didn't venture out real far.
In regards to that of you playing the 5 position, this was a time where the game, where everyone had very specific roles, from the point guard to the wings to your forward and your post. You had specific role that you had to play, and you didn't get outside of your role. Like if you were a post player, you shot from probably 10 to 15 feet in and then rebounding, and that was pretty much your role. Now it's changed a little bit to where, you see as many post players stepping out and trying to shoot 18, 19-foot jump shots as they do layups, and it's just a testament to where the game has gone. I'm personally a bigger fan of when you have those designated roles. I guess that's because the way I was raised and the way I was taught to play the game, but it's so different now that I know there's probably some people listening to this that it's kind of hard for them to imagine that, you just had certain things you did. You didn't float all over the floor. You stayed in your designated area.
That's completely true. Now, that's not to say we ran offenses. We ran specific plays. I can still see those in my mind. And they were like a motion offense. You had out-of-bound plays. You had specific plays where you screened. And I did get some shots out. But, yeah, mostly my job was to post up on whoever was guarding me and to take a shot in the paint and either make it and go down the floor or get fouled and hopefully make it anyway, and then shoot free throws, which was another thing that I got really good at was free throws. But yeah, fast forward 20 years later, I have a daughter who played, and she was she's 6 foot, and, she got to pull out and shoot a lot of threes, and she was really good at it. And she didn't really play the post a lot. She did some, but she, was all over the court, not just specifically in the paint. Right.
So during your time at Swifton, I said I was pretty familiar with Swifton, but one thing I'm not real familiar with is who was Swifton's big rival?
I had to, I told you I was talking to Coach Gardner. I had to talk to him about that because honestly, we had several teams in our conference, but I know that one of our biggest rivalries, like in conference, was Lynn. And then BlackRock had pretty good teams, but, our like rivalries, just non-conference were just down the road was Tuckerman. That was always a big rivalry with us because we're 8 miles down the road, but they were a bigger school, so they weren't in our conference. So that was always a big rivalry. But in conference, it was St. Paul, Lynn, BlackRock. Those were the ones I really remember. Strawberry had a pretty good team there for a little bit too, but every game was a fight. It wasn't, I don't remember a lot of easy games. There were some teams that were easier, but they were all pretty good teams.
So I want to expand a little bit on the rivalry with Tuckerman, because and correct me if I'm wrong here, but Tuckerman's where your daughter played, right?
She did. My older daughter and my son actually graduated from Tuckerman, and then my younger daughter played there through her sophomore year, and then we moved, and she finished her high school career at Riverside in Lake City. She played there for 2 years, and then she went on and played at Williams Baptist for 4 years.
I think that's pretty cool of, your former high school and where your two of your older kids played, that being the rival. I mean, that had to lead to some fun in-house conversations, I'm sure.
It did. Yeah. I mean, and, I know that you had mentioned this was kind of about those schools that consolidated.
Right.
Well, that was, we played Tuckerman, and it was always a big deal. It really was. And normally we beat Tuckerman. I don't remember them ever beating us as girls. I know the guys were a lot more competitive with Tuckerman. But yeah, I mean, once my kids, my son actually was his senior year, he graduated from Tuckerman, and seeing him in a Bulldog uniform wasn't ideal for us, but we made the best of it.
Sure.
And it turned out fine. But yeah, I mean, it was a really strange concept when they, started that consolidation process, and trying to think about your kids not being, all three of my kids and I have boards in that Swifton gym with our names on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty cool that we have that. I wish that they hadn't consolidated, but it turned out okay.
So I'm glad that you went there, because I mean, it's like you're in my head here with the way the questions are. I want you to think back to when the consolidation and everything was going on. When you first got the news that Swifton was going to be consolidated, and they went in with Tuckerman, correct?
Yes.
So
now back then, there were other options being considered. We had big meetings. And of course, I was a very young parent, and my kids were, but we had big meetings about, maybe going to Hoxie. That was one of the options, but Tuckerman is what we ended up doing. And I think it worked out well. The school in Swifton is still a Swifton Pirate gym. They have a middle school there, but the high school is no more.
But I think it's cool that you still get the Kell Classic every year.
Yes.
And you can go back into the gym, and the gym is still in great condition. That's one thing as an alumni of a school that doesn't have anything left. I'm a little jealous of that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's definitely been a great thing. I mean, like I say, I don't go a lot anymore. Of course, we did, and my kids played. I played in the Kell Classic, the first one, and they played in it, and so it's very cool to see, on Facebook and social media, the kids that are still getting to put on that purple and gold and playing in that gym, because that gym means a lot to me. I spent a lot of hours in that gym, and that was like my home away from home. And I hope, it's going to be a sad day when nothing is happening in that gym. And that Kell Classic is still a really good tournament. And that's, very encouraging that it's still doing so well and that so many people, know about it.
Yeah, and it's very, very popular in the Northeast Arkansas portion of the state. And then there's still a few teams every once in a while that'll come over from the north central part as well. I got to play in it. A matter of fact, one of the years that I think it was my sophomore year, I believe our regional tournament may have been at Swifton. And of course, the memories are a little fuzzy, but I always enjoyed going there. It was a unique setup. You come in ground level, you have to go up the stairs to the high bleachers. I always thought the view was really good there, because you're so high up that you can you're kind of looking down on the court instead of even level with it like at most places. And I just thought it was always a really unique setup.
But it was a good gym. There were other gyms that were kind of set up that way too. But I felt like, back then I knew there were some gyms, and this too, that we played in that were definitely older and not, not as, and that's an old gym now, of course, but yeah, that was a great gym to watch a basketball game in. It really was. Being up off the floor was great. Now, running those bleachers was not fun at all, and I had to run a lot of those, but it was a great gym. It's still a good gym, and I think they're actually working on making some improvements to that gym this year.
Well, that's awesome. I always keep up with the Kell. I've been out there. My daughter played out there a few years ago when she was at Westside. And it brought back memories going in there because I hadn't been in there since I played. And I'm sure you can relate to this because there's certain places that you walk into and it's just immediately you have that feeling, your mind starts going down memory lane and you start thinking about, oh man, we got beat here or we won a big game here. I mean, it's it's funny because my daughter had a game out at Mammoth Spring. I think it may have been her junior year, and I had not been out there since we played. And long story short, there was no love lost between my high school team and Mammoth Spring. And the instant I walked in, I immediately felt my blood pressure rise. And it was one of those deals of it did it without me realizing it had happened. And then I'm like, wait a minute, Marcus, you're a 40-year-old man now. You got to calm down. This is not 1996. Everything's going to be okay. Yeah. But just walking in and you get the popcorn, you hear the shoes squeaking. There's a smell of like the leather and the varnish on the floor, and it's just, it just sets off all those memory triggers that. If you spent time playing ball and practicing like most of us did, it's just something that hits you hard.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And, being in that gym and you bringing up Westside, I guess I didn't know your kids maybe go to Westside, but yeah, Westside was one of the teams that we played in the Kell Classic. And I do remember this game. This is one of them that I remember, but I think I was a junior and Westside put us out of that Kell Classic in the semifinals. Oh, wow. I actually broke my wrist in that game. A girl stepped on my hand. And so I had to come out of the game, like in the third, maybe fourth quarter, and get taped up. I mean, I had it looked like a softball almost underneath, on top of my hand. But of course, I wanted to go back in. And Gardner had taken me out, and they were working on me. I don't know if you know Jabbo Floyd. I'm
Absolutely.
Sure you know that name. Yes. He was the boys' coach at that time, and he was taping me up, and I went back in, and I got fouled numerous times and shot 6 free throws and airballed all of them because my right wrist was broken. I mean, I went later after the game, and after that, this was another thing that, old school coaches, I learned to shoot free throws left-handed. And so that's what I worked on while I was, I was out a couple of games, maybe 3 or 4. But he had me on the free throw line every practice shooting left-handed free throws. But yeah, I mean, just things like that, you remember, and that gym, and I remember, yes, I mean, everything about that gym, I remember it. I remember, back then we wore long socks and we had long socks to our knees, and they said Pirates down the sides of them. They were so cool and we loved them, but we would rub our feet, to clean our shoes, the bottom of our shoes on our socks. I don't know. I don't think guys did that, but girls did that. We wiped our shoes on our socks, and those socks would always end up stained. But yeah, I mean, even that, and just, there were big windows into the concession stand that were looking into the gym. And you remember seeing, at the end goal, people were watching you play. And, it was just, I mean, it was great. All the fans, everything was great about it. There was nothing I can remember negative about that at all. It was all just positive energy all the time.
Well, and I'm sure Swifton was the same way as Biggers was on this, but it wasn't just parents that were at the game. The entire community came out on game night, and you may have a neighbor down the street yelling at you just as hard as your parents do.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I know my mom and dad worked a lot, and my mom worked at night a lot. So she wasn't always able to be at the games, but my nanny was there, and my aunt was there, and my neighbors were there. And, everybody else's parents were. Yes. I mean, just because your kid graduated and didn't play anymore didn't mean you didn't go to the game on Friday night. You just did. That was entertainment for small towns. And it was great because all those people were there. They weren't there just to socialize. I mean, they did socialize, but they watched you play. They knew what you were doing. They, talked to you after the game. They were encouraging. They were, they were there for you. If you needed help, there were, hundreds of people there that you could ask for help.
Yeah, and I think it's a little different now. I'm not saying the kids don't have the support that we had, but it's just different. I don't know how else to put it other than it's just different than what we grew up in those small communities like Swifton and like Lynn and Biggers Reno and, all of those schools that were in that conference. I mean, I try to explain it to some of my friends that maybe they graduated from Westside or they graduated from Nettleton, or one of those other larger schools around the area. And it's almost like I'm speaking a different language to them. And they just, it's almost one of the guys that I interviewed earlier said, if you didn't grow up in that small community, there's no way that I can explain it to where someone who grew up in a large school would fully understand it.
Yeah. I mean, and, honestly, I have known people over the years that did grow up in, larger cities. One of my boss for 15 years was from Little Rock. He graduated from Central High School. So,
oh, wow.
When he heard what we were like the polar opposites, but,
right.
Yes, but most of the people that I've been in contact with over the years have been small town folks too. We're still in Northeast Arkansas, and there are some larger towns, and they are getting larger. I mean, I live in Jonesboro now, and, my grandson plays City Stars, which is a totally different thing, but I'm like, yeah, this is different. And I was glad that my kids got to experience small town school, small towns in general, and small town sports. I mean, I don't know that it made them better people. Maybe that's a stretch, but I think that it is different. And, it is good. There's nothing wrong with the way I grew up. There's nothing wrong with the way they grew up. I hate it that small towns are just becoming obsolete. I drive through Swifton now, and there are a lot of things that are the same, but a lot of it is different, and I don't know those people anymore. It is different in that sense for sure.
Definitely. I this past weekend, I went back to Biggers to visit with a guy I graduated high school with, just for a few minutes, and driving back, there's a few things that I noticed were the same, but there were a lot of unfamiliar faces. Whereas when I was growing up, it felt like everyone knew everyone. And that's just, when you lose the school in one of these small communities like Biggers Reno or like Swifton, you have a lot of people who have to leave because the school is kind of the heartbeat of those communities. And once it's gone, everybody kind of has to do what's best for them.
That's right. That's right. And that's kind of where we were. Not really so much with my daughter that graduated from Riverside. I mean, Tuckerman and Riverside were basically the same division,
right.
But it was, life happens and you move away from things and it changes and you try to do what's best for your kids, of course. But I mean, that whole everybody knowing you and, in the 80s and 90s, my brother was 4 years younger than me and he grew up in the 90s, early 90s. But, back then you didn't do anything without somebody knowing what you were doing.
Yep.
And you didn't get in other people's business, but there would be a phone call and you would get home and people would know. I mean, but they were looking out for you. They weren't trying to get you in trouble. They just wanted what was best for you. And they wanted all the kids to do well and to grow up and be good people, and small towns, they're great. They are. They're great. There's nothing wrong with coming from a small town.
All right. Last question here, and I'll let you get out with this one. You mentioned that you had kids that played ball. What's more nerve-wracking, Mary as a player or Mary as a mom watching your kids play?
There's no, that's an easy question. I had a great time playing basketball. That was, being a player and being on a team and having success and, having a record here or a record there, or, people remembering, this or that. It's great to be a big fish in a small pond. And that's basically what I was. But when you start watching your kids have success at something that you love, and you see that they love it too. And, my older two kids, they did love playing. They weren't as passionate about it as my younger daughter, but they were good and they had success. But, when you're watching your kids succeed and, learn and, have a good time, it's great. It's also the worst time in your life, and you probably know this, but I've never been so upset or so irate or so, joyful or just, whatever the nth degree of whatever that emotion is. Yeah, of course, with your kids, it's so much better. And I remember their games way more than my games, way more.
I can relate. Yes. And I feel like I have a pretty good memory on most of my games, but at the same time, the emotion thing that you hit on, those emotions swing a lot harder, as mom or dad, than they did. And I was a guy that played with emotion too, but it just doesn't compare.
No, it's totally, one really funny. So my son was a big kid. Really big kid. We're talking about 6'5", 6'6". By the time he was 6'5" by the time he graduated high school. Big kid, 250 pounds. And I remember him getting pushed around a little bit, if you can believe that. And I remember wanting to go out on the court, protect my baby.
Right. Yeah.
But, he just kind of looked at me and shook his head. And I, of course, gathered myself. But yeah, it's a totally different animal when you're, I think it's easier when you're on the court than when you're out there having to, restrain yourself.
100%. I understand that mama bear mode kicked in for you. And
gosh, it did many times, many times. Yeah.
Well, I can't finish this out without reminding everyone that, you're still in the record books of the NEA. You're tied for second in most points in a single game. Looks like against Wiener in the opening round of the 87-88 season, you put a 40 burger on Wiener.
Yeah. I do remember that somewhat. I remember that game. I didn't know that was a record for a long time. And then one time, social media, all of a sudden, my daughter tags me on Facebook and, it was an NEA tournament, whatever. And, I still had a record. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't even know it was a record. But, yeah, I remember that game somewhat. And we actually beat Lynn in that tournament, too, to get, we beat Wiener, beat Lynn. Then we played Mark Tree, if I remember. And back then, the girls didn't get to play on the big court until they got into the semifinals. We played up on the upper deck, So we got to get down to the big floor, and then Mark Tree took it away from us. That was a little different, team than what we were used to. But, yeah, I remember that game. I had a really good game. I shot a lot of free throws, didn't miss a free throw. It was a cool game. It was great. There was a lot of games that, I don't remember ever playing a game where I didn't have a good time. it was great.
So there's two people ahead of you tied with 42 points. It's Lori Carter from Cave City and JC Brown from Hoxie. They had each of them had 42. And then you're next in line, and you share the second place honor with Lisa Bagley from Sloan Hendricks. Both of y'all have 40. So there's two at 42 and then two at 40. So that's a heck of a game, I gotta say. I mean, I never came anywhere close to that with my best game. So kudos to you and the fact that record. Well, yeah, I guess I should have, but going back to that whole thing of roles, I knew my role, and my role wasn't to shoot. So
I got to shoot a lot.
So, well, your record is still there. You're, like I said, you're second all time, and I think that's pretty cool. And I couldn't end the episode without bringing that back to the forefront.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I mean, it is really, it's very, very cool to know that you still have something out there that was, impressive. And yeah, you didn't hear a lot of 40-point games going on. I will mention, and my daughter would be upset with me if I didn't probably, but my daughter, who graduated from Riverside, her senior year, she had 42 in a high school game.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yes, but she did shoot 3-pointers, and I did not, so I will mention that as well, so she hears that.
There you go. There's the disclaimer on it. So,
that's right.
Hey, Mary, I really appreciated you coming on the show and getting to visit with you here, and being the first female player that we've had on the show. I'm pretty happy to open that door, and looking forward to getting several more of the female stars from Northeast Arkansas on in some future episodes. But thank you so much for coming on and doing this with me.
Marcus, I really appreciate it, and I really love what you're doing. I think that what you're doing is really a grand gesture, and it's going to help a lot of people remember what small schools were all about.
Thank you very much, Mary, for sitting down with me and talking about your days as a Swifton Lady Pirate. Now, Mary set the bar quite high for future female guests on the show. But before we close out this episode, I want to send a big thank you to my very good friend Carlina Adams for making the connection between myself and Mary for this episode. I also want to thank everyone who's been listening to the first season of the Final Jump Shot. The show continues to grow every time I check the numbers, and for that, I am just extremely grateful to every one of you. Earlier in the episode, I mentioned that we are approaching the end of season 1. Now, the plan is to release a couple more episodes, and then we're going to take an extended time out, make some minor adjustments to our game plan, and we'll be back around the tip-off of the high school basketball season for the 25-26 season. However, just because we're not releasing new episodes for a bit doesn't mean the work's going to stop. We're going to be working on the production of season 2, and we need your help. If you have an idea for an episode, whether it's about a player, a team, or a coach, drop us a message on our Facebook page with the topic that you think would make for a great episode. And while you're there, go ahead and click that like and follow button on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube page. By liking and following the Facebook page and subscribing to YouTube, you're helping us to continue to grow the show to the next level. Thanks again to all of you for listening. I'm Marcus Carlton, and this is The Final Jump Shot.
You've been listening to The Final Jump Shot, a Cam Productions podcast. Subscribe to The Final Jump Shot to ensure you never miss an episode.